This is the part I look forward to. When I'm quilting, I feel like I'm out of the country. I'm completely inaccessible. I enter a world, the quilting world, the mindless world, the daydream world, the needle in, needle out world. Needle in, needle out. Needle in, needle out. It's a vipassana of a sort. I've decided to quilt this in a more rough way. Since it's so dynamic and it's not a classic quilt by any means, I'm thinking of doing something with sachiko and with big stitches to maintain the sort of rough, almost peasant quality of the quilt. This is from a book I have on sachiko. They're very intricate, so they wouldn't show up if I did one of these, and they're quite difficult to lay out. That's a very interesting one. It's traditionally done with white thread and on indigo. It's a very classic, elegant, beautiful technique. I have a friend who goes to Japan frequently, and the last time he made a trip, I asked him if he could bring me some sachiko thread because it's hard to find here. So white is the traditional one. Well, I was expecting maybe 6 white things. He brought me all these wonderful colors. So there's only one bright red. I'll certainly use that, especially on the white. I think it's going to take away from the blatancy of the pure white in that Superman panel. So it's time for the fun to start. The purpose of a quilt is to give warmth. And this is done by sewing 3 layers together. A top layer of fabric, which may be pieced or could just be a single piece of fabric. A middle layer, which is the stuffing. It could be an old blanket or some sort of batting filler. And a bottom layer, which is usually just a plain piece of fabric. These are sewn together. The way in which they are sewn together is the quilting. This can be done several different ways. Customarily, it is done with tiny stitches running along the side of each seam line. The more seam lines, the more stitches. If you're quilting a quilt like Log Cabin, the stitches are taken in the ditch, it's called, right on the seam line. This helps the logs round out. Or you can have a type of quilting that goes just across and is basically irrelevant to the seam lines. You can buy templates for designs to quilt, elaborate many-petaled flowers, stars, whatnot, geometric designs. And you can mark these with pencil on the surface of the quilt and then take your tiny stitches on those lines. Or you can do what's known as freehand quilting. You just take off and stitch across the top with no markings. The result of this quilting is more spontaneous, a little less rigid than when you're following the lines. You just naturally make slight variances in the widths of the stitches, the widths of the lines of the stitches, suddenly they'll start to change and go in a different direction. That's the quilting that I'm using on this quilt. I'm using sachiko thread. I'm taking large stitches, and at this point I still do not know what I'm going to do. The unfortunate aspect to this frame is that I can't look at the whole quilt as I'm deciding what to do with my quilting.